Welcome to the Recovery 2.0 online conference. I am your host, Tommy Rosen, and today I'm just delighted to be speaking with Dr. Melody Moore. Melody is a licensed clinical psychologist, yoga teacher, author, and social entrepreneur. She has spent over 15,000 clinical hours specializing in recovery of eating disorders through integrated treatment of psychotherapy, yoga, and holistic nutrition. Melody, thank you for lending your voice to the Recovery 2.0 conference. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I so enjoy being a listener to this conference, and so the opportunity to be here and chat with you is a thrill. I'm delighted. Thank you.
Awesome. The feeling is very mutual. So I do want to dig into your area of expertise, and it's an area that is it's one of the most painful areas of addiction, I feel, and it's certainly one of the most pressing public health issues. For mostly statistically for women, but definitely also for men as well. And that's eating disorders, body image, and all the issues and challenges that go along with those conditions. So I want to ask if you wouldn't mind, if you would share a little bit about your personal story to give some context for people who are watching today. How did you come to do this work? Are you yourself on a path of recovery? What's the story with Melody Moore?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was raised in a family and in America, in a culture where what I thought was valuable about me was the way that I looked. And I came to that illusion. I convinced myself of that illusion based on I had a very beautiful, very thin mom who was often complimented on the way that she looked, not on how she treated other people, not on, her characteristics, but really on, wow, you're so thin. And it was really admired and esteemed. And as her daughter, I felt like that was the way in which I was also going to be seen as worthy or not. And so really, I grew up with so much distortion around my own body image. I was actually at a healthy weight my entire life, but felt like crushed by the fear of too much, too big. It's like comes with that shadow of not enough, too much. And it really took me until my late 20s and the practice of yoga and a lot of therapy, but the practice of yoga was really pivotal for me to understand that it doesn't matter ultimately, that my body itself it's a temple, right? It's a prayer. And that the way that I treat it, that matters. I want to be nourishing. I want to be kind. I want to have a relationship with my body that's connected, but not to judge myself based on how I look. And for me, the necessity of that, which can sound like small stuff to somebody who's not in that struggle, it can sound like what's the deal? Like to me, the necessity is because we have such a finite amount of energy and resources available, period, to give so much thought to the addiction of that perception took away from the possibility of being able to think about anything else or anyone else outside of myself. It was really a selfish place to be. How do I look? Comparing myself. Yeah.
And what does, I'm assuming at some point along the way there, that leads to some kind of bottom. What does that look like?
I think it's a different kind of bottom, or at least it was for me. Than maybe most people with addiction can feel. I never had a day of like, this is the worst, but I did have like stepwise moments of thus far, no further, letting go of certain first like behaviors with food, but then more so for me because it was mental. I remember being actually at a yoga retreat my friend Carrie Kelly was leading in Mexico. And I remember waking up one day and for the first time in my life, not getting up, turning sideways in the mirror to measure the pudge of my belly, the extent.
Yes.
Right? It used to like determine the kind of day that I would have completely. If I thought my belly was distended and other people were going to see, like other people really are giving that much energy toward how I look, but it really would determine like the way that I would see myself, my self-esteem entirely and how I would interact. And I remember one day praying before I got out of bed there in Mexico on that yoga retreat and thinking, what if instead, and so maybe we could see this as a bottom, it was certainly like a paradigm shift for the way that I live.
Yeah.
Instead of how fat I feel today, I'm more concerned with how other people feel about themselves in my presence. What if I just drop that and really allow myself the grace and the freedom of being able to connect to other people and get concerned instead with how they feel about themselves, not how they feel about me, certainly not how they feel about my size. And that was a big shift for me.
Well, that's a massive shift. Does that come at the end of some kind of work that you were doing, or particular program? Or, I mean, had you communicated about your challenges with parents, friends, a therapist, any form of mentor?
Yeah, I've been in therapy since I was in graduate school to become a psychotherapist. And they were like, yeah, you need to be in therapy, which I 100% back and get behind. I feel like all of us who hold any sort of emotional space for other people gotta be in therapy. I'm still in therapy and I plan to always be in therapy. So that was certainly useful. You know, talking about with my therapist, and I've had 3 for years, over years, the meaning of all of this. You know, for me, it was a lot of like not being able to sit with my emotions, not being able to tolerate discomfort. So it was about how I looked, but it wasn't. Ultimately, it was about how I was feeling and not having any tools to deal with trauma or reactivity or discomfort in any way. And so pushing it all toward, well, I can feel badly about the way that I look, instead of, wow, I feel missed. I feel terrified. I feel alone. I feel ashamed. I didn't have access to those kind of words. So I think being in therapy and getting those kinds of tools and having those available did allow for some of that to seem less insurmountable to me.
Yes. Did you have a lot of experience with controlling of your food regimen, or perhaps bulimia, or other forms of eating disorders?
I really didn't so much. My mom and my older sister struggle with anorexia. And I feel like what I did was eat at them as a child growing up. Like I kind of knew I'm not going to be able to out thin them. That just felt too difficult for me, but I would eat and overeat and like eat at them to get out of the race. But it was self-sabotaging to eat when I wasn't hungry, kind of like I was also eating for them.
Yeah. Wow. I've never actually heard that phrase, eating at them.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. I get it.
Right? Just as though it's going to negatively impact somebody else, that I'm putting unnecessary not nourishment into my own body. I didn't.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the addiction affliction, regardless of what form it takes, seems to be seated in the mind.
I think so. Yeah.
And so as you're going down that road, so your path of therapy, for example, that has been the main sort of work that you've done to move into a greater awareness and to get out of that head that we all understand and then down into the heart. What other elements have you used to do that work?
I really feel like it was the yoga practice. Like without therapy, yoga alone, I don't think would have been enough for me. I'll never know, because I didn't have it without therapy. But it wasn't until I got on a yoga mat and allowed myself to feel the sensations in my body, those precursors to emotions, that I could reconnect what felt so severed right here, right? The head and the heart had to connect, but I really had to be inside my body, that asana allowed, in order to finally get the sense that my body is not the way that it looks. It is, though, the way that it feels, and to be able to use those feelings as a compass, as a guide, really like the wisdom of the feelings, not only to determine hunger and fullness and satiety, but also to determine fear and rage and sensitivity and isolation and grief. But to me, without the yoga practice, just therapy alone, I'm so overly intellectual. I was up in my head and I could talk about patterns, but without feeling them, it wasn't doing much service for me in terms of actual behavior.
Yes. I've heard our mutual friend, Ralph Gates, talk about yoga as sensitivity training.
Yes. Yeah.
And I like that a lot. And that seems to be a bit of how you're describing it. Becoming more sensitive to what's there. I mean, there's a, literally the head is cut off from the body. And so that training, so critically important. Do you feel that yoga is something that most everybody ought to do?
I do. I feel like some people, and I have no idea what this would be like, were already born into a body that felt connected to their sensitive soul, or
Mm.
maybe they were already born with some capacity to not be reactive. For me, I feel like I have to practice yoga in order to not be so reactive, in order to
Yes.
not cause so much harm to myself and others.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's fair to say prescription everyone.
Right.
I don't know anyone who's regretted the practice.
Well put. Well, it's a leading question. Let's face it. I'm constantly trying to advocate for people to get onto their mat and practice yoga and meditation. And so I really appreciate the backup on that, you know? So I want to talk to you. I want to break down the dis-ease of eating disorders. I want to understand more about that. I want people to understand more about that. Talk to me about our attempt to control and where control sort of plays into this whole puzzle.
It makes it control, the attempt to control, and all of us do it to certain extents, right? But control period is an illusion. I mean, ultimately, we have control over so little. The rate and pace of our breath, we've got that, and how we respond, what words we put to the feelings that we have as we're responding to someone. I think we can control that. The rest of it's not ours. And yet it causes so much panic and annihilatory anxiety for so many of us that we can't control other people's opinions, the way things are going, the timing, any kind of outcome. So I think for a lot of people, it becomes very easy to try to control something, one thing. And it's almost like the feeling of overwhelm about so many things, all kinds of relationships, to money, to God, to work, to others. It can feel like, well, we could just put that all in a siphon, I don't know if that's the word, and translate it over to food, because we all have to be in relationship with food.
Yes.
And that's, I think, what differentiates eating disorders from other substance abuse, maybe not processing addictions, but substance issues, is we have to have relationship to food in order to live. So it's already there as something that can be related to in a way that's so full of all kinds of ways to harm ourselves.
So this attempt to control through our intake or lack of intake of food, in your opinion, it underlies some of this affliction?
Absolutely. It's even to control how we're feeling, even to control emotions. A lot of times overeating is rooted in I'm attempting to soothe myself, right? If I'm craving something sweet, if I'm craving relationship, if I'm craving care, I might eat chocolate in order to have something sweet in my mouth. It's kind of symbolic if you think of it that way, or to think of it as just stuffing food to stuff emotions down.
I like that
entirely.
Yeah.
And with restricting, with anorexia and other just restricting period, it's the same idea, really. It's just acted through differently. It's kind of like the reason why somebody might choose heroin or crack or weed might be similar. It's just a way out. I feel that way about overeating and undereating. I mean, restriction is an attempt to control, because there's a feeling of such empowerment, of such will for people, especially that become addicted to the feeling of restricting, and the feeling of hunger can feel very soothing. Right? I've conquered this day, and comparisons in there really big, with control. I'm eating less than everybody else. So there's this imagined, I'm not only controlling my environment by controlling what's not going on my plate and not going into my body, but I'm also controlling all of you by winning at this race that I'm making up is happening.
Right. What a fantastic sort of mind trap.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little, if you would, about the process of healing from that. What are the in your vast work, what are the elements required to move out of that darkness and begin to see the light?
When we think about the biopsychosocial model of any illness, it's okay, then breaking down for each individual person, what of their biology is is intact and is really not going to be able to have much movement, what's already there. And so some of that's just psychoeducational.
Yes.
Comes to an understanding even about temperament and qualities. I mean, there's a large component of genetic predisposition to eating disorders, of the range of eating disorders, binge eating and anorexia, bulimia too. So that's like, wow, okay. There's that. And to be able to acknowledge it's kind of like knowing, oh, I have a history of addiction in my family. And I'm so therefore I'm set up. The gun's already loaded. How do I avoid these triggers? Another big piece, the psychological piece, of course, is the mind, and teaching people how to see themselves and their reality as not something to be controlled, but really in so many ways, something to be surrendered, something to understand. I had a big shift in reading Pema Chodron's book years ago, When Things Fall Apart, to understand that these elements, thank God, actually aren't up to us to control, and to be able to understand that this is the piece that I carry and the piece that I am contributing. That reconnection, the body piece, the reconnection of hunger and of satiety, of fullness, teaching people really how to have a sense of their belly and how to trust in the wisdom of their belly, trust in the wisdom of their gut, that the body is made to take care of them. It's not actually trying to hurt them or like there to cause harm. So a lot of it's like straightening out the cognitive distortions that are in place. Philosophically, we can think of avidya. At the root of all of it, it's this illusion. And it carries out with eating disorders as separation of mind and body. So reconnecting through asana, through meditation is so helpful. And then again, I mean, it has to be a tolerance of emotion. And not just a tolerance, really a welcoming of emotion, that we get rid of the feelings that emotions themselves are going to annihilate us. Because I think at the root, it's so often that there's no skills, there's no tools for how to feel our feelings, and therefore how to how to set up boundaries, how to ask for support when we need it, but how to reject intrusion when it's happening to us in a way that doesn't feel comfortable. Because then we can stop playing out all of this with food, playing out like the psychological happening, the dynamics with food and on the plate. I think of sometimes the plate as a diorama of what's actually going on in the head and in the heart.
So what do you feel makes the difference between somebody who's able to heal and somebody who's not?
So that's hard to answer. That's a really good question.
I'll say this, not that I can make the question any easier. Excuse me. I feel that in my dealing with people who have eating disorders, just like anyone who's coming off of, say, heroin or methamphetamine or any other addiction of any kind, alcohol, whatever, each addiction seems to have its idiosyncrasies, even though I believe it's all coming generally from the same place, which would be trauma. Mm-hmm. So I have ideas in my head about what might stack the odds in the favor of a person coming off heroin to get sober and to stay sober. I have some ideas about that. Yeah. I'm looking for some ideas about what could help stack the odds in the favor of somebody who's coming off of 10 or 20 or however many years of thinking in the ways that you're describing.
One thing, and this won't surprise you, is community.
I love that.
To not feel like they have to suffer alone, and to continue to use the only tool they've had available, their limited perspective of mind, to get through something without being in community, in process, of course, with a therapist, but also a community as a whole. I think that's one of the real gifts of a yoga practice, if it's practiced in community, is starting to build relationships outside of self and letting other people see, validate, acknowledge, nourish who you are. and what's happening with you.
Yes. And tell me more about the forms that community can take and what you've seen has worked.
One of the things that I feel like is so useful is actually therapy groups.
Mm.
I know people who are in recovery who attend OA meetings, for example. I have led for years therapy groups of people in recovery together so that each of us have that experience of intimacy through vulnerability and through connection, and stop the shame, the vicious shame that halts healing. And that's kind of another like big piece to me, is stacking the odds in favor of someone. Let's teach them compassion, forgiveness, so that there's an opportunity for thus far no further. I don't have to continue to be in this way. Other ways of community, friendships built through shared values, like the friendships that I know I've created through a yoga studio and through being involved in service together. That we can come to rely on one another and just not feel so alone in the process of recovering from anything.
Yes. Thank you. In addition to community and some form of therapeutic process, and obviously 12 Steps is a community, as you've mentioned. Do you see a lot of people dealing with these kinds of issues through 12-step work?
I know people who do. I don't lead 12-step meetings, and so I don't know.
Sure.
People also do very well coming out of treatment centers and staying involved with alumni. To an extent, it can be a little bit gray, because sometimes it's just so easy, as you know, in all of your experience, to get triggered by somebody else or be activated by somebody else and then become competitive again. Yes. That can be tender. I think there's not enough in the eating disorder. I know there's not enough in the eating disorder community world of mentoring.
You mentioned people getting out of treatment. So are you talking about treatment centers that are set up specifically for these disorders?
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's obviously very hopeful and exciting that these places exist for this particular thing. And I'm not sure that people are aware of it.
There are so many treatment center options for people. There's residential treatment. There's inpatient hospitalization, which is required if medical stabilization is necessary. There's intensive outpatient and partial care too, and they come at the range of ages. So there are treatment centers who concentrate and just serve children, and those that just serve adolescents, and those that serve adults only. And they're absolutely everywhere. They're scattered across America. I don't know that I want to support a specific treatment center, but a lot of them also have yoga and meditation as part of options. And to me, sometimes it's the only thing that's going to allow someone to get out of the environment that they're in that's causing them to feel like this addiction is necessary. And it's causing them to feel like the symptoms, which are really tools. I mean, they're using them right to cope with whatever's going on. And sometimes it just takes getting out of whatever environment that is to be able to be isolated and concentrate on getting better and have a team of people around you who are in support of recovering.
You're speaking my language. A lot of people, every person who's struggling with addiction, no one goes to rehab like by choice, really. It's not like, God, I'm so excited to go to rehab today. Yeah. And yet here I sit at 25 years sober, and I'm like, I'd like to go to rehab tomorrow. To have an entire staff just focused on me.
Right.
I'm taking a look at what I'm doing well and not well in my life. Eating 3 meals a day, it's like, from my perspective, as crazy as I must be now at this point, I actually think it's an incredible thing. But of course, when you're stuck in addiction, you will not think that at all.
It does not feel that way for so many reasons. But one of the reasons being the addiction itself is fighting to keep you held down and held back by it. And that's a large part of what goes on and what feels like resistance to treatment. Like the addiction's like, no. And in eating disorders, especially in anorexia, the addiction's like, I'm trying to kill you. It's my job to kill you. This has the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric illness for women.
Mm.
So it's very difficult for the person who's in the struggle to see them trying to do things on an outpatient basis alone, or maybe with a therapist that they're seeing once a week, or that kind of thing is going to be enough to move the needle at all. Because it's just like the addiction is so much bigger than they are. They may be rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, but it's just not enough.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy. I'm wondering if you can speak. You mentioned at the beginning of our talk, society, the world into which you were born, where we look at people, we judge them by their outsides much more than we do by their insides. And girls today, has that changed from when you grew up as a little girl?
Only in that I think it's gotten so much worse.
So much worse.
Right, the access to screens, girls and boys today are watching between 10 and 12 hours of screen time between their computer and their phone and their iPad or whatever brand it is. That is a lot of time. And all of that is really controlled by media that has this really narrow definition of enoughness. It's thin, white, right? Like it's very narrow. And so when people start to, and of course they do, our brains are wired this way to compare against that very narrow definition of not only beauty, but really enoughness, of worthiness, they're then automatically made to feel like unless they look a particular way, it's not enough. And
of course they're looking at it more and more and more as we go. How do we fight that trend? How do we, what are some of the answers to helping our young people to feel like they're enough, to also develop healthy relationships with their bodies and with food?
Yeah. I think the most important thing each of us adults can do is take our own relationships to our bodies very seriously and get real right in our own way that we talk about ourselves, that we talk about other people, that we talk about bodies, because as kids are listening and they're modeling after what they're hearing in us. They're looking up to us, right, and admiring. So a big piece of it is taking accountability and taking responsibility for the words that we choose to speak about ourselves and other people and the actions that we're taking. They're learning from us. Yes. And another thing we can do is celebrate their effort, celebrate their curiosity, celebrate their characteristics verbally. Catch them doing anything well and talk about it to them, so that the messages that they might be getting from other people about how darling they are or adorable or how they look are at least counterbalanced by, I really like the way you're sharing with your siblings. I really see a kindness in the way that you open the door for that person. Thank you for making your bed this morning, whatever it is, that there's also just a celebration of who they are becoming internally and talking about that with them constantly.
I love that answer so much. And in terms of peers who are seeing, so I'm interested in learning about how peers can help their peer friends who are struggling with these issues. So let's say you're a 15 or 16-year-old girl and you have pretty much figured out that a friend of yours has an eating disorder and is or just is up in her head, just really struggling around these issues. What's the move there?
The move there is to not talk about her weight to her, which might sound counterintuitive, but what's happening is like the internal dialogue with the eating disorder. Every time somebody says, you're really losing a lot of weight or you look very thin to me, the eating disorder is like, yes, it's working. Keep going. Don't eat any, right? So that's the struggle and the thing most people do. I'm noticing you're losing weight. Oh no. Right. So it's not to comment on that, but to comment on behaviors. I'm noticing that you haven't had lunch with us all week long. It seems like you're going to the gym, but you're not ever coming to dinner with us anymore. I miss you being there. What's going on? To talk about behaviors specifically.
Okay.
And to offer to help that person talk to their parents. Not to betray them, but to tell them with them, right? I don't know if your parents have noticed this, but what would it be like for you if we told your mom that you're not eating lunch anymore? What would it be like if we told the school counselor that?
That's sweet. I'm wondering, have you seen examples of that where people are actually willing to go? I guess obviously the approach is that tone and that approach is so important.
It's important. the other thing, if that doesn't work and the person says no, is of course going and telling someone, asking someone, a parent, a school counselor, a teacher, a coach, for help without that person's knowing. It's just that it can backfire, and the person feels isolated in their illness. And then a 15-year-old, especially with an eating disorder, that eating disorder becomes their best friend.
Right.
And if you feel like their other friends are abandoning them and betraying them, then it just like strengthens the relationship that they're making up
Yes.
with the disordered part of themselves. That's why I always suggest, like, see if you can work with them to get them to talk about it. Because I also feel like inside anyone who's struggling with an addiction, including eating disorders, there's a piece of them, a part of them that's longing to be supported, that's longing to be discovered, and that wants help. So I feel like if we can appeal to that part.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
How about some advice for parents, Melody, who are concerned about their children on this front?
I would be. I would be too. I get it. I just want to validate any concern around that. There are people who specialize in treatment of those with eating disorders. So there are lots of therapists, lots of psychologists, lots of psychiatrists. I would say go directly to someone who specializes in working with people with disordered eating and have a chat, have a talk with them about how your son or daughter is doing, what behaviors you're seeing, and get a sense of, would this be a good idea to bring your child to therapy to be able to get the support that they desperately need. Sadly, a lot of people will take on more than is really available to them in terms of tools. And I found over 12 years of treatment, I know I've gotten so much better as a therapist having the experience of working with people with this specific illness, because like you said earlier, it is very specific. So I think that piece is just really important for parents whose kids just are young and they're wanting to get and safeguard against them becoming ill or struggling with this addiction. It goes right back to they're watching you. They're watching you. So be very mindful of the words that you speak about yourself and how you treat food, that they're not going to assume that you're being restrictive, to talk about nourishing your body instead of dieting, to talk about the things about yourself that you appreciate instead of the things about other people or the way that they or you look that feel comparative.
Thank you so much. I want to ask you if you have some words for people who have identified for themselves that they are struggling in this way, but are scared and perhaps in that delicate space of not really sure if they want to give this up or not.
Yeah, there's just so much freedom on the other side of it. But I get it. When it feels like something has allowed you to navigate through your life in a way that's easier because you have this thing that you can rely on that feels like it's helping, it feels like it's supporting and allowing you to go throughout your days in the world with more ease. What's actually going on is that it's taking you away from being in a relationship to what's outside of you, to God, to in any sort of spiritual practice, if the word God is way too overwhelming or there's too much resistance to that, but to the people around you too. I mean, the extent to which you are in relationship with disordered eating or even distorted body image, it's taking you away from being able to have relationships with other people that are authentic and that are connected, and that comes from vulnerability. So sometimes it feels like this disorder or this addiction is allowing me to be in relationship to others, but it's not the truth. What's actually happening is it's taking away from the possibility of truly being connected and being known. And there's this longing for approval and longing for belonging that we all have. And it's really easy for an eating disorder to convince you that it's going to help you with that people appreciate your thinness, or people appreciate the fact that you never say no or you never get angry. And so you eat your food and stuff those feelings down so that you can stay in relationship. But maybe there's liberation on the other side that comes from the willingness, the really the courage to start to let go of those distortions and those patterns and that addiction, and be able to have instead a connected relationship to yourself, to your own body, and to people around you. And there's lots of help available. So many people have walked in the steps of this disorder and of this addiction, and have come out of the other side.
Mm.
And those stories I don't think are told enough at all. And eating disorder recovery can feel pretty hopeless, but it's not.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, you've had such a recovery.
Yes. Yes.
And you don't, in my several years of good fortune of knowing you, you don't carry that kind of, I mean, I'm not inside your head, but what used to plague you, it isn't like that any longer.
That's right. No, it's liberation. And then that allowed me the freedom to ask the real questions. Why am I here? What is my purpose? No one's purpose is to be the thinnest in the room. No one's purpose is to not have feelings and to stuff them all down through food, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, nobody was put on the planet for those reasons. And for me, like, that's been the biggest benefit of this process of, I love how you say discovery of recovery, is being able to really come alive to, why am I here?
Mm.
How can I be a benefit? How can I serve? Yeah.
Thank you. So Melody, can you speak a little bit about the connection, if you see it that way, between athletics and attempt to control and body image issues? So sometimes people going, like ultra endurance sports, and you see a lot of people with certain kinds of issues in those sports. And I think teenagers as well can really get into this sort of addictive mental cycle around athletics as it relates to their body dysmorphia and body concerns.
That's right. Yeah, and we could even add to the ultra athletic list asana, and getting fiercely, I would say, addicted to asana practice. So it's
yoga for those who
yoga, the practice of yoga, the posing of yoga. There is a really high correlation. Of course, there's a high correlation of eating disorders with dancers, gymnasts, runners, for the most part. Other sports as well, of course, because when you're using your body as a tool that way, it can be really easy to then cross over the line into the body becoming like overly important in the way that it's valued, and in the way that the time and space that we give it, that way. I think part of it is, and I think what you're speaking to is the crossover with perfectionism and with outcome orientation and with attachment to performance or to speed or to endurance, whatever it is, and the kind of mindset that it takes that's required, for someone to be extremely restrictive around their eating, but bulimic too, so not necessarily so. I think there is a lot of crossover. I think it's really difficult. I have a friend, Lauren Fleshman, who just retired as a professional runner, and we've done some work together around runners and eating disorders, because there's a competition with self, but there's also a competition with others for most athletes, right? And I remember, this is funny, but I was a cheerleader in high school, like a competitive cheerleader in Texas, and I remember being weighing in and knowing the other girls' weights, which is a total setup for competition.
Wow.
Right? And it's like that for runners too. They don't necessarily get weighed, but they're looking at each other's bodies. They're wearing hardly any clothes and being able to see and to compare. So I feel like it's possible as an athlete and as just a human in relationship to food to detach from being so outcome focused, to feel more into like, what is the process? What's the feeling in this moment with this inhale and with this exhale? Again, back to the feeling, back to a being and being a sensation. I don't think that takes away from being a winner. I think it's possible to have both without it becoming harmful to oneself.
Yes. So do you meet healthy people in your world?
By clients, I meet a lot of healthy people in friendships.
So
people don't come to me because they feel like they're healthy, right?
What's the goal? Where do we want to get to? What's it look like, feel like, sound like, from your professional opinion and from your own experience?
Yeah.
To be a person who, is healthy and feels good and is grateful and glad to be here on this planet?
Yeah, I think, thanks for that question. I feel like, and I know for me and through clients I've had the fortune to work with, that it looks like in relationship to food and to body, the wisdom of the belly is what dictates how much and what we eat. That we see our body as something to nourish because we understand it as being the container for our soul, not the thing that determines and dictates our value.
Mm.
Not that we outsource self-worth to other people's perceptions of the way that we look, but internally, this physical form, it's not to be neglected or denied, right? We need it. We need our bodies because they carry us around to do our work in the world. So to be able to treat the body as though it deserves nourishment and it deserves love, and then choosing foods and liquids that go into it that feel nourishing, that feel kind to ourselves. So then it looks like the freedom or the recovery looks like eating things that, again, feel nourishing to the body, that are going to serve the body, that are going to give us energy and prana, right? Life force, instead of that are going to weigh us down, or instead of using food as a way to cope with emotion, food's used as a service to the body itself. So that relationships can flourish with other people, so that we can, again, like ask for support when we need it, allow ourselves to be known, be in community, be seen, and feel worthy of taking up enough space in the world that our contribution matters, that we can have an awareness that who we are is important and it's valuable. And then I say that because a lot of times people who are struggling with anorexia are literally disappearing, right? And there's this feeling internally that, like, I don't matter enough to be here. I don't deserve to take up space in the world. So in recovery, there's a different kind of feeling altogether, this ownership of like, I, just like you, deserve to be here and to take up enough space.
Well, Melody, thank you so much for that and for your time today. I want to ask, how can people find you, find your workshops and all the offerings that you're putting out in the world?
Thanks. Two ways. My website is Dr. Melody Moore, DrMelodymore.com. And my schedule is listed on there, how to join me for retreats, for workshops. And the nonprofit that you mentioned earlier, the love of my life, is Embody Love Movement, EMBODY, lovemovement.org. And we have 300 facilitators across the world. And so hopefully there will be one in your city. And if not, join us, come to a training and become a facilitator so that you can help us create this kind of world where everyone experiences themselves as worthy of love.
I love it. I love it. Well, Melody, thank you so much. We will speak to you really soon.